When do the people have the right to replace their government? It's August 18th, 2026. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. There is a question most Americans almost never ask, not because the founders failed to answer it, but because the answer is so fundamental that most people have forgotten it. When does government lose its legitimate claim to continue governing in its existing form? The Declaration of Independence gives us an extraordinary answer. The founders wrote that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Now think carefully about those words. They did not say government grants the people that right. They said it is the right of the people. But the Declaration also establishes a very high threshold. Government should not be changed for, quote, light and transient causes, end quote. So this is not an invitation to destroy government because we dislike an election, a tax, a regulation, a judge, or a particular administration. The question is much more serious. What would have to happen before the people could reasonably conclude that government itself had become destructive of the purposes for which government was created? That is the question we are going to examine in this series. And we are going to examine it using the Liberty Dialogue's structure. We begin with authority. Where does government's authority originate? The Declaration answers, government derives its just powers from the, quote, consent of the governed, end quote. Then comes jurisdiction. What are the boundaries of the authority that the people delegated? Can government legitimately exercise powers never entrusted to it? Then status and standing. Who is exercising the power? Against whom? In what capacity? And upon what demonstrated legal foundation? Then comes obligation. What establishes that the individual is actually subject to the government command being asserted? And finally, enforcement. If government cannot establish the authority, jurisdiction, status, standing, and obligation underlying its action, upon what legitimate basis does coercion follow? Now take those questions beyond one individual case. Apply them to government itself. What if constitutional limitations become routinely disregarded? What if government institutions exercise powers they cannot demonstrate were delegated to them? What if due process exists on paper but becomes practically inaccessible? What if government can seize property, restrict liberty, impose obligations, or destroy livelihoods before fundamental challenges to its authority are meaningfully heard? What if representatives cease meaningfully representing the people? What if institutions designed to check one another instead protect one another? What if elections change the people occupying government offices but no longer restrain the expansion of government power? What if peaceful petitions repeatedly produce no meaningful response? What if government increasingly operates through presumptions that citizens must disprove rather than government claims that government must prove? And what if these things cease being isolated failures and become a persistent pattern? Those are not conclusions. Those are questions. And that distinction matters. The Declaration itself provides the standard. It speaks of, quote, a long train of abuses and usurpations, end quote, demonstrating a design that subjects the people to absolute despotism. Only then does it say that the people possess not merely a right, but a duty to throw off such government and provide new safeguards for their future security. So before anyone talks casually about abolishing government, there must be a record, evidence, history, patterns, failures of remedy, failures of representation, failures of constitutional restraint, and proof that ordinary mechanisms of corrections have become inadequate. That is where the Liberty Dialogue's approach becomes important. We don't begin by shouting, "Abolish the government." We begin by asking, what was government created to do? What authority did the people actually delegate? What limitations were placed upon that authority? Have those limitations been honored? What remedies remain available when they are violated? And ultimately, at what point does repeated government failure become something more serious? A government structure that has become destructive of the very purposes for which it was instituted. Over the coming videos, we are going to examine the concrete conditions that could theoretically justify such a conclusion. Persistent violations of fundamental rights, systemic disregard of constitutional limitations, exercise of undelegated power, destruction of meaningful due process, government without genuine accountability, institutionalized corruption, failure of representation, manipulation or destruction of meaningful electoral remedies, government coercion unsupported by demonstrated lawful authority, suppression of peaceful petition and lawful dissent, failure of the courts, legislatures, executives, and other institutions to provide effective remedies. And finally, the most important condition of all, the exhaustion or practical failure of peaceful constitutional mechanisms capable of correcting the problems. Because abolition of government was never supposed to be the first remedy. It is the ultimate political remedy described by a generation that had concluded that every lesser remedy had failed. This series is therefore not about rebellion. It is about something much more fundamental. It is about political legitimacy. Who created government? For what purpose? Under what authority? Subject to what limitations? And when those limitations fail, where does ultimate political authority reside? The founders gave their answer: with the people. Now we are going to examine exactly what that means. And as always, may truth reign supreme.